Scott Christianson, welcome to the Human Capital Innovations Podcast.
Thank you for having me, Jonathan.
It is truly a pleasure to have the opportunity to talk with you. Your expertise is particularly relevant in this time of COVID pandemic, and really as we've seen rapidly advancing technologies influencing the nature of education and work already, but I think given this current crisis where we're leaning even more on technology, I feel like it might even accelerate us into embracing more of these technologies moving into the future. So I'm excited to have a really interesting discussion with you today. I wanted to just briefly provide the listeners a bio of Scott. Scott is a successful instructor and business owner with more than 25 years of experience in networking, video conferencing technology, and project management. He currently serves as an assistant teaching professor at the University of Missouri, where his teaching interests are focused on the impact of technology on society and human well-being. What a interesting life you live and an interesting area of teaching and research.
Yeah, and as you mentioned, it's particularly interesting right now. I think you're exactly right when you talk about how things are kind of moving forward, or some people have said this has brought the future forward, or press the fast forward button, whatever analogy we want to use. I think that we're seeing some changes that may have happened eventually in 10 years or 5 years that are going to be happening in the next year. We are starting to rethink as we reopen businesses, as we reopen campuses, in whatever form that is, how we are going to be able to take advantage of these technologies. And I think we also need to keep a little bit of a mind toward when should we not be using some of these technologies, because it's fairly easy to see a technology that drives a process and makes it more efficient and think, well, that would be good. We want things to be more efficient, but sometimes we can have some unintended consequences, especially when we're looking at the types of decisions that we want to make involving people.
Absolutely. And at the very end of your bio, the focus on human well-being in your teaching and research as it relates to the technologies that you use, I think is particularly important because as you just mentioned, we can gain all sorts of efficiencies through the use of technology, but that doesn't necessarily mean that there won't be corresponding negative consequences for the people that are using them or that are displaced because of the technology. So we have to think carefully through all of that. We have to think through the people impacts. We have to think through the ethical considerations of various technologies that perhaps we haven't really thought about before. And that all takes, a concerted attention and time to work through.
Yeah, and I think one of the things that we didn't really take the time to think about or crept up on us was how machine learning and artificial intelligence is being used in these social media platforms. And that's something that my students sometimes, and professors as well, get sucked into and not really step back and really think about what is this doing to how you think about your life, how you think about your relationships, and also how you think about each other. So right now, not only are we going through this COVID crisis, but we have a lot of unrest in the US right now, and a lot of people that have really kind of different realities that they're in, different sets of facts. And a lot of this can be driven by social media, these other platforms that we now spend a huge amount of our time with. And just to step back a little bit, when we talk about artificial intelligence or machine learning, what we're really talking about is being able to give a computer program a set of data and have it look at that data to find the patterns that it can use to predict future behavior or future patterns, or what the key variables are. So you can do this in anything from image recognition. So I want to identify a cat versus a frog. Now you and I could sit there and we could program all this stuff, and it would be very detailed. Is it green? Is it, certain size, all this kind of things. And maybe after a couple months, we would be able to get some sort of computer program that could identify the difference between a cat and a frog. But instead, we'll allow a machine to kind of learn like an infant might learn, and give it lots of images of cats and lots of images of frogs and let it work it out. But this can be used in lots of different ways. So we can also look at Scott's behavior on social media, and we find that he tends to engage more with certain types of content, and he likes things more, he shares them more, and so let's give him more of that. So instead of identifying a frog versus a cat, we're identifying the content that's going to engage Scott. Well, there's no filter on that or no constraint on that to say, let's also have information that is factually correct, or that is not divisive, or is not conspiratorial or something like that. And so you can get a lot of engagement from these machine learning algorithms, promoting things that are really driving us apart, right? So driving to the extreme. So certainly your listeners have heard of this with YouTube, where you click on a couple conspiracy videos or something that's a little bit toward the edge, and the next thing you're learning about how the world is flat or something like that, right? So because these algorithms are not maximized for enlightenment, they're maximized for engagement. And that's one of the things that's kind of disturbing. There's actually a book called Persuasive Technology, written by a professor named B.J. Fogg from Stanford. This should be in the forbidden section of the computer science library, because it basically talks about psychology and how to implement psychological techniques such as random rewards into programs. So you get the infinite scrolling, you get all these other things, and those are just psychological techniques used to maximize engagement. Casinos use these, social media platforms use these as well.
Yeah, that's a great example of some of the negative unintended consequences, or at least I hope, in the case of social media, I hope that's largely an unintended negative consequence.
Right.
But absolutely, they're there when we're using technologies. And, of course, within the social media space, there's lots of discussion about how and if that should be regulated and how we would do that. And so many things for us to consider. I'm curious what you think. We're both professors. I'm curious what you think about the role of AI and machine learning, and how that's going to be interacting with and influencing the university space, the education space.
Well, yeah, this is an interesting discussion I have with my students as well. And there's certainly things that we could look in our university and decide we would like to have them optimized, right? So scheduling of classes, I'm just still aghast that this is done at a large, 30,000 student university, mainly on spreadsheets that are emailed around and then finally get uploaded to the registrar, and requests are made there. And that seems like the kind of thing that we could turn over to a computer, because there's not a lot of bias that could be made. Maybe I won't like my assignment of where I'm teaching, but it's something that could be optimized. But if we start to look at like admissions, okay, so we could look at, well, here's our graduates that have been successful. Let's look at their applications let's use that to train an algorithm to look at the current applications and accept those people that would be good candidates or might be successful through our program. Now, I think you might start that out without, with very good intentions, but you may not realize that a lot of your data from the past may be biased in some way or another. There may be a racial or gender or some other bias that you're actually introducing into your system. And so there have been some limited experiments with this, and that's exactly what they found. Unfortunately, there have been other programs, such as one that was used for sentencing guidelines, same sort of thing, where Scott is arrested. We want to look at people like Scott, see how they did as far as recidivism and all that kind of stuff, and we'll sentence Scott based on that. Well, once again, that data may have some bias. We're also leaving out the opportunity for individual decision making. So we could look at other areas such as grading. So I'm sure that you have writing requirements for your classes, just like I do. And one of the great joys is slogging through
Yes.
papers. I really don't even like to edit my own stuff, let alone somebody else's, but that's part of the job. And, you know, you could say, well, boy, I'm going to take all my A papers and all my B papers that I gave B's to and C's, and I'm going to feed this all into an algorithm, and I'll just have this algorithm grade stuff. Now, that may be okay for things like a business memo or something where we don't really want much creativity, or you're writing up an article for financial analysis or something like that. But when you start to look at things that actually involve creativity, these algorithms are not going to be able to select things outside the norm. So
Right.
the next Truman Capote enters my class, and the AI is going to give him an F because of his writing style, right?
Right.
So we really have to look at those areas where human judgment is really required or needed. And so that's one of the things that you know, I think we have to think about. Now, I did stalk you a little bit, Jonathan, before this. And so I ran your LinkedIn profile through a program called Crystal Knows. And what it tries to do is it tries to determine personality types based on what is posted. Now, this algorithm is not 100%. But it's getting better and better. And it was done by a couple of founders that founded a startup company, and then it kind of fell apart because they didn't hire the right people. So they were wanting to figure out if there's a better way to do it. So I'm not really sure if this is the way to go or not, but it's kind of interesting. It says that Jonathan tends to be more confident, have more confidence in gut instinct than formal structure, which can lead to bold but unpredictable decisions. I don't know if that describes you or not. Visionary, adventurous, spontaneous, is likely a person who likes to take charge of social situation and shares his thoughts on every matter. So I don't know, maybe somebody with a podcast is that type of person. Takes big risks, elevates new ideas, and leads the conversation in a meeting. What drains Jonathan? Researching data, repetitive routine tasks, following a lot of rules, and inflexible schedules. So I don't know, does that describe you?
Parts of it does. It sounds like it's framing me as more of an extrovert than I am.
Okay.
But definitely, you know, it's interesting when it comes to personality, we all tend to operate, you know, well, many of us tend to operate slightly differently in different contexts, right? So when I'm in one environment, I behave a certain way. When I'm in a different environment, I might behave a different way. And I think that's definitely true for me. I definitely am not what I would consider an extrovert, though I can behave that way when necessary. But I tend more towards, you know, listening and paying attention and observing in meetings rather than leading them, for example, unless I'm in the role where I'm supposed to lead it. But anyways, it's interesting, right? But we have, you know, you said you ran my LinkedIn profile through, right?
Right.
So you have all this data, it goes into an algorithm, it then spits out a profile, and a lot of what you just said, I think, is a good description. And none of it was like completely off. So that's really interesting.
Yeah, and there's some, when I ran mine, there's some confirmation bias there too, because it says like I'm thoughtful. I'm like, oh, well,
yeah,
of course I'm thoughtful, right? So, you know, but you might have to talk to my students whether they think I'm thoughtful or not. You might have to get some unbiased data. But it did say that I like to work alone, like to work on projects by myself, and that's definitely true. You know, I tend to like to go off and do my own thing when I'm working on projects. So I don't tend to I have some trusted friends and a few collaborators, but not a lot. So yeah, it's kind of interesting, you know, and once again, it's reflects how we project ourselves in different
Yeah.
platforms, right? So if I project myself on LinkedIn in a certain way, I'm probably going to be able to manipulate this algorithm.
Sure, sure. And it speaks to what you were saying earlier about, uh, the constraints of something, the constraints of an algorithm or AI machine learning. It can only predict based on the data it's given. And so that's why sometimes there's bias built into it, because the data inputs have bias. And so the outputs necessarily would have bias. And so there has to be a way that we balance the efficiencies and capabilities of machine learning with um, human insight and nuance and the ability to understand various contexts that might be out of the norm, right?
Right.
And that's difficult.
Yeah, and there's certain professions where I think this is going to have a big impact more rapidly. Medicine is one where we see a lot of AIs that are very effective and even more effective than a doctor at recognizing certain patterns. So if you think about what a radiologist or a pathologist does, that's what they do, is they recognize these patterns, right? Here's an X-ray, here's a tissue sample. I'm looking for a certain pattern that indicates a certain problem like pneumonia or cancer or something like that. And so there's been some AIs there that are just fantastic in being able to feed large amounts of data about, here's X-rays of people that have pneumonia, here's X-rays of people that don't. Now I'll figure out if Scott has pneumonia or not. Now, where the expertise comes in is afterward is, okay, well, we think Scott has pneumonia. Now, we need somebody to really think about what is going to be appropriate treatment. You know, what is he going to be able to take? What are his other problems? Because all these AIs are very narrow. They're very
Hmm.
good at one little thing.
Yeah.
So if we go back to the example of the cat and the frog, if your daughter has recognized the difference, she could probably extrapolate and figure out a little bit about what a lion is. Kind of like a
Hmm.
big cat, right? And even if she's only seen kitty cats. But a machine learning algorithm is not going to be able to do that, okay? Because it can't take data from one area and transfer to another. So that's one of the things that's very difficult, is we don't even know what is the characteristics that the AI is keying in on. So there's an entire field called adversarial AI, which
Mm.
tries to kind of break this stuff. And one good example that I go to all the time was it's from a number of years ago now, was Google's self-driving car. And they taught it what a stop sign was by giving it lots and lots of pictures of stop signs. And it got very good at recognizing stop signs. Unfortunately, when some researchers got a hold of it, they were able to put some little stickers on that stop sign, and it then decided that was a no right turn sign, because they weren't specifying the criteria that, hey, it should be red, it should be octagon shaped, and it needs to have the word stop on it somewhere. And those are the types of things that a child would key in on, right? But the AI, because we're just giving it lots of versions of stop signs, may be keying in on something else in that image. And so that's one of the difficulties. So pathologists are also looking at this as far as, here's an AI that seems to be really good. What if we just turn the image a little bit, or something is a little bit altered in the sample? How does that affect it? So I think these will be very powerful tools, and we're going to see doctors having to learn how to work alongside an AI,
Yeah.
use it
Yeah.
as just another diagnostic tool. Of course, we always hear that AI is going to replace um, uh, all these professions. I'm not sure in some of these that it's really going to replace professions. I think it'll replace some of the grunt work. I think it'll make it more efficient. But I think what we're going to have to do is we're going to have to train our students how to work alongside of these tools.
Yeah, and actually that was the next question I was going to ask you. Within, whether it's the university space where we're teaching students, or if it's within organizations as they're trying to train their employees and reskill and upskill their employees, how is AI going to influence the future of education and training? And how do you think we, as instructors and professors, how do we prepare our trainees and our students to embrace the technology and to be able to have it extend their capabilities in their chosen profession?
Yeah, that's a great question. I think we're still kind of struggling with that. And one of the things that I want to make sure that we're doing is thinking about AI, and as it gets incorporated into these tools that we're using, making sure that it's there to benefit the student and not the institution. So my institution and every institution has rankings and other things like that that they're concerned with as far as their reputation. This influences all sorts of other dynamics. I would argue that that's a bad way to run a university, but I'm not in charge of running a university. So I think that we need to think about this, because if we go back to things like admissions, there was kind of a scandal, I think it was about 2 years ago, where a number of colleges purchased the SAT scores from the College Board. And they did this so that I could, if I was that institution, they could actually recruit students that they had the intention of denying access to their institution. Because if you can say we rejected these high-level students, then you are seen as more selective and you move up in the rankings. And so you can imagine an AI being applied to something like that, and you optimize the AI to improve your rankings, you could get all sorts of horrible effects. And so how do we make sure that this is really centered on the student? And I'm a little bit worried that we start to see technology firms incorporating AI into our learning management systems, into all sorts of other systems, without us really stepping back and understanding that. So I don't know if we need something like an institutional review board. We need an AI review board at an institution, or what. But I also think that if we turn this around and we had students being able to use AIs to help them select their institutions. So if they, just like this little personality profile, if they were able to look at personality profiles, or an AI that was trained with personality profiles of different students and where they were successful at, you might decide that, well, maybe a big university is not the place for me. Maybe I would be more successful at this other institution. So, but once again, can we empower students to make better decisions about their career? I also think that we're going to start to see a lot of different formats for learning, and I'm hopeful that our traditional higher education institutions will start to embrace those. So like micro learning, I was experimenting with one the other day. It's kind of neat. They send you a text message every day with on your phone with a new lesson. So it's just like, 100, 200 characters or something like that. That's kind of an interesting way to do these kind of micro lessons. So how could we incorporate that into classes, or how do we change the nature of a class, right?
Yeah, that's really interesting. And I think about, I'm not a technologist. I teach human resources, organizational behavior, leadership. But I want my students to be prepared for the future of work, and I want them to have skills that are transferable and adaptable, so they can be adaptable as they go throughout their careers. And so, we in the HR field, of course, for example, we talk a lot about HR information systems and HR analytics, and those are being driven more and more by AI and machine learning. And so my students may not have any of the technical expertise of how do you create an AI algorithm, but they need to understand how to utilize the technologies to their fullest extent and understand the dangers, the potential dangers of these technologies, right? So they can be ethical decision makers. And I think about whose role is that within the organization? Hopefully every leader in an organization, from the CEO, C-suite on down, are trying to take an ethical lens. But a lot of times their focus isn't on these types of questions. Their focus is on profits. Their focus is on reducing costs, increasing revenues, increasing efficiencies. And so sometimes it falls on the HR department to kind of be the ethicist of the organization. And I want my students to recognize that responsibility and have a toolkit to be able to think through these types of things. Yeah, it's an interesting time, and we just don't know. We just don't know what it'll look like.
Yeah, and I think that you're exactly right. There's some dangers here with things moving so fast as we're trying to deal with the COVID crisis, and we're trying to get things back on track or back to some sort of I don't know if we call it a new future or what. I don't know what we're going back to exactly, but I don't think we're going back at all, right? So we're whatever is coming, we're going there quickly. And so I think there is some danger there of not recognizing that this new tool that you just implemented may have these unintended consequences. You know, there's a lot of data journalists that are doing a very good job on researching some of this. And so I would say that anything that you know, it says it has machine learning in it, should raise a red flag. And you should really understand what data has been used to train the AI
Right.
and what the outcome you really want to see from it.
Yeah, and that's a really good point because a lot of times it's kind of like a black box. You know what the output is, but you don't really know what's going on,
Right.
because we're not privy to the intellectual capital, you know, in the algorithm. And like, so for example, my university is using a software called Civitas, which
Hmm.
uses machine learning and AI to help with um, it helps with a lot of student success types of issues in relation to advising and, you know, students with red flags and concerns that need to be addressed and some of that kind of stuff. What's going to impact student uh, persistence, retention, and completion, those sorts of issues. The problem is it's a complete black box. Like nobody actually knows how it's spitting out its results. And you know, we have other areas of campus that are using more traditional, um, you know, statistical analyses using the same data, and they come up with different outputs.
Hmm.
And so of course they can be different, but then you know some of the differences are a little concerning, and so then you have to question, well, what's actually going on, and is this really helping or what, you know?
Right. No, no, I agree 100%. We have to have some sort of insight into the data that's being used and what is going on in these black boxes. So think about it from something like banking, right? So if you want to find out if Scott is going to be a good uh, uh, possibility for giving a loan to, well, if it comes back and denies my loan, well, is that because of my zip code? Is that because of race? What is this actually about? And certainly we've had to implement laws to make sure that those types of biases are not built into our decision making in the banking system. But unfortunately, sometimes these, you know, credit rating, I mean, talk about a black box. I have no
Yeah,
idea what
yeah.
you get this score and they say, well, you can do this and it might improve it and this might improve it. Well, you have no idea how this is being calculated, right?
Right, right. And I think you referred to it briefly earlier, but when we think about it within an organization, an employer, more and more HR tech firms are introducing these AI enhanced hiring tools to help you streamline the selection process, the hiring process, even the interviewing, using video interviews and using AI to analyze the videos and all of that. Really cool in a lot of ways because it can save a ton of time, but man, it concerns me about the potential biases that could, you know, not that it's done on purpose, but just the nature of how um, it works. You know, as you described, it can only base its predictions on the inputs that it's been given. And so if you've had, you know, disproportionately, you know, non racial diversity in the organization in the past, that could definitely influence hiring decisions in the future, which is not okay. It's not okay legally, it's not okay ethically, morally, and that's a huge concern. And so we have to, you know, while we learn how to better utilize these types of tools, we have to be super careful and not allow ourselves to kind of write off our own responsibility and accountability for the decisions that are being made.
Right. And to bring it kind of back full circle, back to social media, this is another thing that my students are wrestling with when they go to apply for jobs, because a lot of folks will want their social media accounts and they'll want to feed this into an algorithm or feed it into a program. And then when I am looking for candidates, I can say, well, throw out anybody that has posted pictures of themselves drinking, or throw out anybody that has used the F word. And you can basically screen and bring it down to, I now I have 50 applicants I'm going to look at. And so that's been kind of fascinating for me to find out that this is going on. In fact, I had several students that had to create social media accounts because they needed an internship, and they were finding it very hard because people didn't believe that they didn't have social media. So I had one gentleman that was in the military, or wanted to be in the military. He's now actually a commissioned officer, but during our business program, we required that they go have a internship. And he was having a tough time because he would say, well, I don't have Facebook or Twitter, because he had heard when he was 15, if you want to be in the military, you better not have social media. And so he had to create an account and start posting stuff so it looked like he was actually on there. And so that's kind of fascinating, that this is almost a requirement for some positions, it seems like, or at least it raises a red flag if you don't have social media, which is very different from my days and your days of getting hired, I'm sure.
Well, right. And you think, like, in the area of HR, for example, in the US, we don't put pictures on resumes, right?
Right.
They actually do in many other parts of the world, but in the US, we don't do that. And there's a very good reason for that. It's because there's all sorts of biases that come out if someone sees your picture. There's tons of studies that show that once a hiring manager or a hiring committee sees your picture, that will unduly influence.
And even your name, right?
And
So,
even
there's been
even your name.
studies on that. Yeah.
Yeah. And so, but now, so we still don't put pictures on resumes, but now everyone has a LinkedIn. And so you just look them up on their LinkedIn, whether they provide the profile or not, you go look them up, and then you know exactly, what they look like and what their background is, race, ethnicity, all that kind of stuff.
Right.
Yeah. So we have to be careful. Well, it has been an absolute pleasure. Excuse me. It's been an absolute pleasure talking with you. Such an interesting and fascinating topic, super timely, super important. I hope everyone will carefully consider how AI and machine learning are being utilized within their own organizations, and be thoughtful about the process of analyzing the approaches that are being taken. Thank you so much for your time, Scott, and your sharing your expertise. Any final words before we close?
No, I will tell you, I have a little website. It's just learnabout.ai, and I try to put articles and things that I might mention in that we talked about, so that Crystal Knows website is there, and there's some books that I recommend. There's a couple called, one of them is called Artificial Unintelligence, that really goes into the details about these algorithms written by a data journalist. And so there's some other recommendations there if your listeners want to check that out.
Wonderful. I hope everyone will look up Scott. He's on LinkedIn. I'll put a link to your profile in the show notes, and check out his website and great resources that he's provided and that he can help you with if you need help in this area. Thank you again, Scott. It's been a pleasure, and I hope you have a great week.
Okay, you too. Thank you.
Thank you.